Hey guys, so today I wanted to take some time to answer your questions that you have posted on our Facebook gardening group. So if you're new to the channel, we have a Facebook gardening group. It's called Set Apart Health Gardening. I will put the link in the description below. You guys can check that out. So we do have a bunch of new members and some people that have posted some questions. So let's dive right into them. Okay, so the first question here comes from Yelena. And if you see me looking over here, I am reading from my laptop right here. So Yelena said, I have a hard time figuring out when to plant certain fruits and veggies, like snow peas, for example. I wanted to plant them last spring and they shriveled up quickly in sun as it was time to bear fruit. Also, sowing seeds versus starters, pros and cons, shade and sun planting. Okay, so Yelena, that's a great question. I will post in the link in the description. There is a schedule that you could follow for planting. So you don't really need to memorize when to plant certain things. Over the years, when you start getting a routine in, it'll become simpler to just remember, oh, I plant this that time, I plant that time. But sometimes it's hard to remember. And for us, we seed a lot of things for the nursery and for ourselves. So we have a calendar that we follow because otherwise there's no way we would remember all of it. But I'll post in the link. Clemson Extension here locally in South Carolina has great information on their website. And they have a lot of schedules, like when you plant certain things. You mentioned peas. We did post a video on us planting peas specifically. We planted our peas in February, so late February, which you can hear in the South, late February or beginning of March. If you plant after the last frost, if you plant peas, they will not do that great because like you mentioned, by the time the sun comes for, in spring, and our spring is kind of different because we don't really truly have a spring. Sometimes you'll have a summer day in our spring and that can kill the peas because the peas can tolerate more of a cool and even a light frost over what they can tolerate in heat. So the heat will definitely fry the peas up. So late February, early March is a great time to sow your peas. We did post a video and you can see kind of what they look like. And your next question, Yelena, was seeds versus starters. We did post a video and I'll share that also on the description just on that topic, talking about what the pros and cons and the benefits are. For beginners, I'll just cut to the chase and I'll just say I really recommend probably trying both, but specifically using seeds almost as an insurance, right? So getting some plant starts just to get ahead in the season because they're ready to go, they're further along. You don't have to learn a ton about seed starting because for a lot of beginner gardeners, it can be a lot of work and it can be overwhelming. The equipment that you need, the information that's out there, but also the space you might need indoors might be just too much for you. So just getting your hands on a few starts, getting them in the ground, experimenting, see what does well, and also just looking at local nurseries that carry stuff that does well in the area, right? So our nursery, we make sure to carry stuff that does well in the South, and then other local nurseries that carry a lot of things. They have a lot of great information as to what does well here in our area. And then Yelena, you also mentioned shade and sun planting. That's a great question. So again, Clemson Extension will be a great resource for you as to what goes in the shade and what goes in the sun. But let's talk veggies real quick. So for veggies, the greens like the lettuces, even cilantro and parsley, if it's not making a flower, if it's not making fruit, more than likely it can afford more shade. So here in the South, we get a ton of sun. Full sun for us is even too much full sun for some full sun plants, if that makes sense. So you can get away with part sun for some things. But long story short, lettuces, cilantro, parsley, Swiss chard, kale, you can do those in the shade. And that's what we do. If you see our garden in the back, way in the back is kind of where we get some shade. So that's where we're going to put our greens. And then also in the front part, we're going to put things that require more energy. So like carrots, for example, they create a big root. They do like to have a little more sun to create a root. Eventually tomatoes, they need a lot of sun because they create fruit. They need energy, so on and so forth. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay, the next question is from Jessica. She said, the hardest thing for me to figure out is how to make my garden beds without having to spend a ton of money on the soil. We have mostly clay and I prefer not to till, so I am at a loss at times. This year, I really want to start some seeds of my own. Yes, so that's awesome. I love that you want to start some seeds. So yeah, a lot of people have this question. So this is a great question. We may end up doing a video just on the soil. I do have some videos, like the soil, like the raised bed mix soil video I made where I showed you just to have a visual of what a soil mix will look like. I was actually making a soil mix for our nursery, a potting mix, but before I made the potting mix, it's essentially a raised bed mix. And then I added the perlite and it became a potting mix. So hopefully that helps. I will link that. But in terms of cost, I found that here locally in South Carolina, at least, I'm not sure if you're watching from a different area in the United States or even internationally, what you guys can get available. But we have some landscape supply places here that carry bulk compost that is organic. The compost that we bought, I don't know if you guys can see in the garden, we have a big giant pile, or there's a video that we posted where Dr. Holly's dad was helping us move our big compost pile in the middle of the garden so that we can have easier access to mix our soil. But our soil mix is 50% organic peat moss, 50% organic compost. We mix those two together. We put them in our raised beds. So the compost you can get from Landscape Supply in bulk, it's about $60 to $80 a yard, and then they do have a delivery charge. I'm not exactly sure how much that is. It really depends on your area and how far you are from them. So just look at your local landscape suppliers. Hop on Google and say Landscape Supply organic compost. Give a few a call, see who has some in stock. Just kind of get a gauge for pricing. The bulk compost will be the easiest, most inexpensive route when you get a lot. I do find that sometimes it is a lot of compost. So 1 cubic yard, I don't know if you guys have seen those companies that sell those soil cubes or those big cubes. That is a cubic yard. It covers a lot because it's a cubic foot or cubic yard of compost, plus you mix that with peat moss. So the bales of peat moss are about $11 a piece or so, and they're pretty big, right? So for, I don't know, $150, let's say, you can really plant a lot, and that is a lot. And to me, that's actually a budget-friendly way, because to me, a garden is an investment, especially your soil. Do not skimp on your soil, because you'll get frustrated that nothing will grow, and then it'll take a long time for things to flourish. And I find that you just lose money because you invest in plant starts, or you invest in seeds, or you invest in all these things, and then you find that the health of the plants isn't that great, or you find that you're having more bug issues, so you end up buying more things to deal with the bug issues, or you just don't get as much fruit as you could. So if there is a place to invest in the garden, it absolutely is your soil, and the first year will be your biggest investment because you're hauling in the most material that you can. And that's what we're doing, right? We're hauling as much material as we can. And frankly, because we got a lot of soil in bulk, it was more cost effective. Now, if you live somewhere that your driveway just simply can't suit a company to come and dump this giant pile of compost, you can buy it in bags. We do offer bulk compost like discounts at our nursery. We have the bags. It's excellent compost. I use it to top off our beds, but that way it's going to be more expensive. Some people have chosen to go that route because they just simply don't have the space. I would say that's about middle of the ground in terms of cost. I'd say the most expensive route would be to buy the soil from those companies that sell them in the big bags. It is tidier and nicer because they just plop that big giant bag. Everything's contained. Your driveway is not full of a big giant pile of compost that you have to scoop and manually get out. Now, there's pros and cons to everything, and depending on your budget, you may want to go one option or the other. I personally find bags to be the easiest route in terms of hauling soil. Because if you get a big giant pile of compost, you have to move that multiple times with a shovel. And for some people, that can be a lot of work. With the bag compost, you can just take the bag, move it one by one, dump it in the bed, dump the bag of peat moss in there, mix it little by little, and that could be easier. Again, more cost, so it's not as cost effective. So usually with anything, right? The more work you want to do, the more you can save. The less work you want to do, the more cost there is, because you're buying yourself time and convenience. So that can be said for many things. Also, I wanted to say another way to save on soil and compost is to start off by building some raised beds that are shallower. So you can go as low as 6 inches on your raised beds, right? So literally build raised beds that are 2 by 6s. Make a frame. Very simple. Just screw the corners together and whatever size frame you want to do. Start by laying down cardboard, lay down compost and peat moss, and mix that all together. And what you can do is the following year, you can build another bed on top of 6 inches. And then you can start adding more compost and more peat moss, so you can spread your cost of compost and peat moss. It could be the next year, it could be 2 years later, however you want to spread it and do it. But you can build your beds up, but you can start with shallower beds. You can absolutely do that. And 6 inches is enough. If you lay down cardboard and you have the soil, the cardboard will rot down in about 3 months, and then the plants will have access to the soil underneath, your native soil. So yeah, that's definitely another way to save on compost. Just simply don't make as deep of beds. Ours are about 12 inches, and we went that route because it helps suppress weeds. We don't have to deal with weeds as much. And also, we just find that plants thrive on deep soil, and we wanted to plant like carrots and deeper rooted things. So that's why we did that. But those are some tips on helping you with that. Okay, so the next question comes from Pamela. Pamela, you asked here, timing, what to plant and when for this area, our area, which is zone 8. Also, companion planting to make the most out of a small space. That is a great question, Pamela. Timing, I will refer back to the first person that asked, I believe Yelena. I will put the links to make sure to check out in the description for the Clemson schedule. It'll tell you when to seed things, if you're seeding them indoors or outdoors. Also, when to transplant. So if you're transplanting things from indoors to outdoors, or if you're buying plant transplants, that would be the timing of when you would plant things. And then feel free to follow us along on the journey, because the things we're planting now, we're trying to show people when to plant things. So as of now, we have planted peas, and they're doing beautifully. We have planted carrots, because now is a good time to start carrots. So Pamela, if you see this video, feel free to plant your carrots, direct seed them. We planted radishes, because radishes love the cool weather. And then we also planted some lettuce. You can plant kale and beets, onions, potatoes. So right now is a good time to do all those things. And we have taken videos of all those things, and we will be posting those videos shortly. We'll show you tips on growing each one of those, so on and so forth. But if you want to get going, get the ball rolling, now would be a good time to do that. And companion planting, that'll probably be its own video, because there's a lot of information on that. But really, instead of thinking of like what plants go together well, I would just more so focus on just having a lot of diversity. And I think a lot of us have in our brains, like, if I'm going to plant a bed, let's say, I'm going to plant it of all one variety of something, because we just like to categorize things and we like to organize things. And that's great. But I think the better route to go is to interplant and intermix. So let's say I have a 4x8 raised bed. Instead of planting that whole bed, the solid one thing, one monocrop it's called, meaning lettuces, which we did in some areas, because in here in the spring lettuces do great. There's not a ton of pest issues that we have, but in the summer that's really the time to create biodiversity in your garden, which means to mix and interplant things together. So for example, if you're planting tomatoes, plant a few tomatoes in that 4x8 raised bed. Plant some marigolds. They help attract good bugs. They help repel deer and other bad bugs as well. Plant some flowers in there. It makes it beautiful, like marigolds, but also like zinnias and cosmos and snapdragons and wildflowers and other things that attract pollinators that will help with your fruit production, but with your good bug population, like ladybugs. It'll attract many of them, which will help with aphids, which really are a thing here in the South. So plant 2 or 3 tomatoes in that bed. Plant something like basil in there as well. That's a companion plant. Some herbs, things that smell strong. Pests typically do not like. So think about odors in that sense, in a good way. Plants, you can plant peppers and you can plant different things that you want to plant. Just intermix, right? And then find another bed and do the same intermixing. Because if you have one solid bed of one thing, just all tomatoes, then the pests will find them easier because there's no disruption in the smell. So it's easier for them to locate these plants, if that makes sense. You'll still have some issues here and there. Tomato hornworms always come. We just pick them off. So on and so forth. But instead of thinking about which are companion plants, we might do a video on that also to help you out with that. But just keep in mind, just plant things in diversity, in lesser quantities in the beds, but more diversity, and then spread them out. Oh, and Pam, you mentioned how to make the most out of a small space. So what I would recommend for that is you can check out square foot gardening. Square foot gardening is a great way for beginners to just get an idea for spacing. Essentially, you take your raised bed, or even if you don't have a raised bed, just take a shape, right? A square or rectangle shape, divide it into smaller squares that 1 foot wide, or 1 foot, essentially 1 square foot big. So if you have a raised bed that's 4 feet wide by 8 feet wide, you would have 4 squares wide, 8 squares long. And then each square, you can Google raised bed, or you can Google square foot gardening spacing, and it'll tell you per square how many plants to plant. Now, over the years, we found that even then, we still cram things in a little tighter. And you can that's a guideline for us, in my opinion. You can keep planting over the years and figure out what works for you. Some things may need a little more space. Some things you can even cram more than what the square foot gardening method recommends. But I find for beginners, it's just a good visual to see 1 square, how many plants will fit in there. It just gives you a little more boundary and a little more understanding of what plants can do. Which plants go big, which plants stay small. And once you learn their personalities, if you will, then you can kind of fudge it a little bit. Then you can kind of mess around with lettuces, for example. We plant them so tight. Spinach, we plant them extra tight, tighter than square foot gardening method. Things like that. Basil even, we plant pretty tight. And we fudge it to where we don't even see the ground anymore. And we'll show you a tour of ours, how we planted them, so you can see our spacing. But tomatoes here in the South, I would space them out a little more because they need more space to breathe. Because here in the South, the blight, early blight, can get them pretty early. So we recommend spacing them out a little more, pruning them, so on and so forth. So square foot gardening method to start with. And then later on, you can go what's called bio-intensive gardening, which is cramming everything in as long as your soil is stellar. And if you start with compost, peat moss, you fertilize it, you're always feeding your soil will be stellar. So you can cram things in a little tighter so that they're not fighting for nutrients because your soil is so nutrient dense. And then there's other ways to keep building your soil over time. Okay, the next question comes from Jamie. I've been trying to get answers on how to keep the fire ants from getting my food before I do, specifically tomatoes and okra. Okay, Jamie, so when we built this house, I don't know if you guys have heard our story or not, but we bought 3 acres here in Fountain Inn. My wife and I designed our house and we built it ourselves from scratch. We did hire out people to help us build the infrastructure, and then we DIY'd a lot ourselves. So all the gravel you see we did, all the patio, the garden, a lot of things. When we were building the house, it was all clay, it was all raw land, and we disturbed a lot of ant hills. So our house, for the first month, we had a lot of ant issues, fire ants and all other ants. So we found the best thing for us was to find the ant hills, and then we actually kill the ant hills with boiling water. So we have like a tea kettle that boils water in like a minute, but if you don't have one of those, the electronic ones, you can just boil water in the stove. Pour about half a gallon or so, or however much the tea kettle, if you have one, of water will allow on that ant hill, and the hot water will kill the queen, and the rest will eventually die out because they have no queen. And we did that per ant hill. And also, we ended up using these little ant traps. I will see if I can find a picture of these, but we put them all around the perimeter of the house, or you can put them around the perimeter of your garden, wherever the ants are. There's a bait in here that they come in here, and then they take whatever the bait is, they take it back to the hill, and then they poison the hill. And to us, it seems safer than spraying some granules or anything like that. We're always concerned about using no chemicals and things leaching into the ground because we have well water here. So we're always concerned about that. So we found this to be a less invasive, less toxic route in terms of spraying something or getting something to saturate the ground. That's a harsh chemical. And also our in-laws, my in-laws and my parents also have pets, and sometimes they come and they bring them. And I just would hate to have anything out here that's a chemical that the pets could get into and harm them in any way. So that's why we try to opt for a chemical-free option for us. And it's worked great. We have had 0 ant issues since then, and we had a lot. So I hope that helps, and I hope it helps in your situation. So if you see me squinting, the sun is getting brighter out here. Okay, so the next person here is Kristen. Kristen asks tons of great questions here already. I guess my questions in addition would be, what should you fill the raised beds with? Types of soil, compost, etc., feeding and fertilizing, which plants grow best together, and when to plant them. Natural ways to keep the bugs and critters away. Awesome question. So some I did cover, but I'll reiterate some things that I did not mention in the previous questions. So right here, what to fill raised beds with? Feel free to look back in the video, but long story short, 50% organic compost, 50% organic peat moss. And feel free to check out the previous questions, because that'll give you some more information on where to source those. But that's what we use, and we've used it for years, and everything does excellent. Also, I didn't touch on fertilizer, and you asked about that. So we usually fertilize our beds. I don't know if you've seen our videos before, but like planting garlic video, we just dumped a whole ton of Biotone fertilizer, because Biotone is a good starter fertilizer. It helps with root development, and it helps with building the good fungal and bacterial and all that activity in the soil. And that's a good thing. We want that. So we always start with Biotone when we plant anything. And then afterwards, we feed things. You can feed them on a monthly schedule, depending what they are. So tomatoes are more heavy feeders. So you would probably want to feed them with a garden tone once a month, something like that. You can feed zucchini as well, like once a month, because zucchinis are heavy feeders. They produce fast, and they want food. They eat a lot of nitrogen very quickly. Cucumbers, the same thing. Watermelon, the same thing. So if you want to start off, when you start your beds, 50% compost, 50% peat moss, and then just dump a whole bunch of Biotone on top, scratch it in, and then we plant our plants. And then on a monthly schedule, you can plant with something to top dress, meaning you sprinkle it around the base of the plant and then just scratch it in. And we usually do garden tone for things in the veggie garden, and we do plant tone for things in our landscape. And if we don't have garden tone, we'll use them interchangeably. Really, we just see great results. And I really think it's due to the compost as well. And every year we feed it, and we feed it, and we feed it. One thing I did forget to mention is that, let's say in spring you plant your plants, you already added your compost and your peat moss and your fertilizer, you planted your plants, and then they die out, and then it's time to plant your plants for summer. when they die out, I do like to add about a ½ inch to an inch of layer of compost again. And I do love to add another layer of biotone for the new plants like tomatoes. Because the old plants that were in there were feeding off of the soil, were eating those nutrients, taking them up, and creating food for you. So the next thing that comes, we need to replenish the soil. We need to build the soil structure all over again by adding some compost and a little bit of fertilizer. I usually do biotone. So every time you plant, you want to feed the soil. Hopefully that's helpful. And then the other question that you had, which plants grow best together? So feel free to check out Pam's question, which was on interplanting, like companion planting. And I would suggest to, again, just get a diversity. We will probably do a video specific on that. And honestly, we'll probably do a video just showing you our garden tour, so you get a visual of what plants we plant together, what the logic is, why we plant certain things. And many times we know what grows well together, and many times we just experiment to see what does great. Feel free to check out Pamela's question on that. And then natural ways to keep bugs and critters away. Specifically which bugs, Kristen, feel free to comment, and then we can maybe do another video on pest management. But I would say the easiest way is to just simply have lots of flowers in your garden. That's why we have a lot of flowers, because it makes it beautiful. But try to attract the good beneficial insects. And then the other way to help keep bugs away is, frankly, having amazing soil. Because when your plants are healthy, their immune systems are strong, they're not susceptible to as many diseases, because typically stressed and weak plants create signals, and then the pests come and they will kill them. And that's a natural way, that's nature's way of taking care of things, right? And even if your plants are healthy, you'll still have some bug troubles to troubleshoot. But hopefully that helps. Those are the easiest ways to start with, so that you have lesser pest issues. The next question comes from Satu. One question that comes to mind: do you recommend covering the soil? And if so, with what? 2 years ago, when I last did an outdoor garden, I heard from someone that you always cover your soil, but when I heard that it's good to sometimes let your soil get completely dry. So on covering the soil, Satu, that's a great question. I would suggest to cover your soil in the fall into spring, right? That will regenerate the soil. So you can do, for example, leaves. Grind up some leaves, or just take up some leaves and just break them up, sprinkle them all over your raised bed. They will decompose, and then it comes spring, they'll be part of the soil. You won't even see them anymore. You can definitely cover the soil. Soil is like our skin. So if you notice that here in the South especially, even the clay, when the sun is hitting the soil straight on, it'll dry and then it'll crack, it'll lose nutrition. The biodiversity and the beneficial fungal activity and all the nerdy things that live in there will die because they're stressed, because they would rather grow in a cooler soil. So in planting season, come late February, early or mid-February, beyond, because really here in the South, we can start planting mid-February until, we have a long planting season, until October and so on and so forth. Your plants that are in the ground growing will act as a cover. That's why we love to plant our beds densely. Some people like to do a bio-intensive gardening method. Some people like to do a square foot gardening method, which means things grow a little more efficiently, a little closer together. And when you do that, you actually end up covering your soil, protecting your soil. So yes, do we cover our soil? Yes, not necessarily like cover, but whatever we plant acts as a cover. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes if you plant tomato plants, for example, they get tall and you still have a lot of soil space around. We like to plant like lettuce, for example, if it's still earlier in the season, or arugula, or you can plant something that's shallow rooted, like radishes, that don't really take up a ton of space, just to cover up the soil, and then you get lots of food. You can cover it up with basil in the summer, because basil doesn't take up a ton of energy, so on and so forth. Okay, Satu, so you mentioned also in your question, I ended up covering with cypress mulch, and then as a result, I got some moisture-loving bug, can't remember its name, I think the bug was attracted to the compost I had recently added. I removed the mulch and I had to work hard to get rid of that bug. Yeah, so that's definitely due to the mulch. Either remove the mulch like you mentioned, or sometimes those bugs do phase out. They don't make it past a frost the next year. As that compost breaks down, or as that mulch breaks down, you can always top dress that mulch with something that has nitrogen, because your mulch is full of carbon. So add things that have nitrogen, like compost, like worm castings, blood meal. You can even put food scraps on top of there and treat the bark as a compost more so than a soil planting. Scoop it out, put it in a different place, and then compost it, and then you can put it back in, and then the bugs will eventually go. But the bugs are there because they're breaking down the soil. That's what their job is, and they won't be there if there's no food for them. So as long as you don't feed them anymore, or you move them away, right, you should be good. Satu, you mentioned you didn't do anything to mend the soil in the fall and winter. It was just a jungle with all plants and weeds. Should I have? So in the fall, you can remove all the leftover plant debris, the old stuff, and then you can take just the leaves, any like leaves from, in fall from the ground, crush them up, throw them on top of your bed, and you can absolutely do that. We add more compost. We clean up our beds. We add more compost. We add more fertilizer. And we usually will plant turnips because they're a good winter crop. We'll plant turnips. We'll plant cilantro. We'll plant parsley. We'll plant kale. We'll plant radishes. We'll plant stuff like that. Even lettuces. Lettuces can tolerate a cool. We'll cover them if there's a sign of frost. But here in the south, we can grow all winter long. So we don't really have beds that are super inactive in those seasons because we're planting a lot of those things. If we did, we would cover them up with some leaves, and then we would just let them rest, and then we would plant up in the spring. But we love to garden, and we do garden for most of the year. Okay, Satu, so you mentioned tips for prepping the beds for new plants right now. Feel free to check back on the previous questions. Do you till the soil somehow? Dig some to try and see if squirrel buried acorns over there in the winter? Or do you just add some soil compost and call it a day? Yeah, we typically try to do a no-dig method. So feel free to check out like Charles Dowding or even the Back to Eden gardening method. We don't do like the Back to Eden exact in terms of, I won't go into too much detail on that. Feel free to check that out. But long story short, we don't till. We always just add a top layer of compost and fertilizer anytime we're planting something. And compost is broken down mulch, if you think about it. So we're mulching our beds over and over and over and over, removing any weed material from last year. And over time, the more you do that, the more resistant your beds will become to weeds, because you're just not giving the roots and the plants enough time to make big roots. And if the roots are wanting to pop up a new plant, you keep pulling, it'll wear out the root system. And over the course of the years, they'll be fine. I wouldn't worry too much about acorns. Let them pop up, pull them out. Squirrels can be pesky, that's for sure. But if they have food elsewhere, or if they have, like, even you have bird feeders elsewhere, they'll actually eat from the bird feeders, and I find that entertains them enough to stay away. Not all the time, right? And that's kind of nature. So we plant a ton, and sometimes squirrels get our stuff, sometimes they don't. And, there's some things that we can prevent and some things that we can't. If somebody has more tips on squirrels, feel free to post them in the comments, because somebody might have more info on that than we do when it comes to squirrels. And then Satu asks, what are some tricks to deter wildlife from eating your plants, like squirrels, rabbit, and voles? So if you haven't started your garden beds yet, you can get like gopher wire or even chicken wire and put them in the bottom of your beds first. So you can lay down like cardboard, and then you can lay down your wire, your chicken wire, gopher wire, so on and so forth, inside the bed. And then you add your half compost, half peat moss mix, top dress it with some fertilizer, scratch it in, plant your plants. That'll help with the voles, the moles, and so on and so forth. Bonide brand has a repels all granular organic deterrent. I found that a lot of people, that helps them with that. You can sprinkle it all on top of your raised bed, or you can sprinkle it around the surroundings of that. And some people have said that that really helped. For us, it's helped with some rodents. It has not helped with deer. It does help with deer, but in our case, it hasn't. But we haven't found issues with squirrels here or any other things thus far. So even if it helps with some, I still think that's worth it. But yeah, anything stinky. Garlic oil, you can spray around. I found that helps tremendously. Neem oil helps as well. Some things you do need to redo. But essentially, you can also just put stinky plants around the border of your garden. So marigolds are stinky to these animals, to these rodents. Garlic is stinky to them. Onions, stuff like that. Anything the allium family, which is the onion family, will be stinky to them. So just again, mix the smells and make it unappealing to them so that they don't want to come in. So yeah, I see here in your question you said something like that. I was also thinking of planting onions around my raised bed to keep critters out. Yes. So finally, what are your best tricks against clover mite? I hate that thing. Every spring it covers our patio and no amount of neem oil kills it. So try Mite X from Bonide. That'll help with some mites. Also, you can try the aphid traps, the yellow traps. They're for fungus gnats and for aphids. They're yellow. Just Google or on Amazon, check them out. I might put a link if I find some, but mite traps or aphid traps, they're yellow. They're usually attracted to the color yellow. They're sticky traps. They'll go to them and they'll stick. And hopefully that'll help with that. So Aaron, you're preparing us, for your questions. Okay, so how close to plant plants next to the border of bed? So I'm assuming, like, if you have a raised bed, you're wondering how close to plant them in the raised bed. We plant ours as close as the edge. You can, any container, honestly, you can get as close to the edge as you want, because the plants have, as long as the container or the raised bed is deep enough, those roots will go down, sideways, they will find their way. So absolutely use up all that space. Get really tight to the corner. Absolutely. We do that with our flowers because we love our flowers to spill over. Like nasturtiums, they have a spilling habit. For example, or any other plants, like I love Nemesia from Proven Winners. We'll probably plant some in our garden in the corner edges. I wouldn't plant Nemesia from the big box stores because they use growth regulators and chemicals and stuff in the soil mix and when they spray it. So when you put them in your raised bed, it's mixed in with your food. I personally don't like to do that. But when we grow our Proven Winners, we don't mix anything chemical. We do the exact same growth mixture as we do with our veggies. So we treat everything with no chemicals. We don't really treat anything. So we essentially don't use any chemicals for our flowers and our veggies alike. So that way we have the freedom to plant them in our beds and so on and so forth. Now, the Proven Winners ones, we do get in little soil plugs like this. And whatever Proven Winners uses, growth regulators, growth hormones, there is a tiny amount of whatever chemicals they may use there. So we're okay with that because when we plant ours, they're in, nice soil that we use that is organic soil mixture. I believe it's the Pro Mix that we use. And then we do use like the Spoma stuff for fertilizers and so on and so forth to grow them out. And they usually are about 2 months in their pots. So in our mind, when we're watering them for 2 months, a lot of those chemicals are leached out there. So we do like to plant them in our raised beds for fun, again, for pollinators, but Nemesia will spill. And I plant Nemesia right in the edge so that it can spill over, and things that spill over do great like that. So plant very close. Prepping ground for raised beds, just cardboard. So yes, many people had the same question. Again, cardboard, compost, and peat moss mixture, and then fertilizer. Least expensive yet toxic-free raised bed designs. I'm not sure about raised bed design. We have a ton of them, but we use just untreated wood. You can use a 2x6 board. You can use a 2x8. We use 2x12 in our gardens to make them a little deeper. Our garden is big. So if I were to do shallow beds, I just feel like aesthetically it would look dinky. And also we wanted to plant deeper rooted things like carrots and potatoes and things like that. So we went deep with our beds, but untreated wood, 2x thick, meaning, right, boards, absolutely. So that would be the best route to go, in my opinion. And then check out the video we posted, I believe today, shows Sugiban is a technique, and we burned our raised beds. You don't need to burn them. You can use boiled linseed oil and rub it on the untreated wood. That helps give them a few extra years and mileage. You can burn them. That'll help even more. Since our garden is very structured, it's tall, it's a lot of wood that we used, we went the extra mile to make sure we can preserve them as long as we can. And then you asked 12-inch or 18-inch deep beds. Again, I mentioned before the 6-inch, all that. So feel free to do whatever you want. I would go minimum 12 inches if you want to grow carrots, at least, I would say. But honestly, do whatever you want for that, because they will grow. Because things will grow as long as you have good soil in there, no matter what. And then the last question was least expensive ways to fill beds. Maybe with twigs and then soil. So yes, I did answer this before, but I didn't answer like if you have really tall beds. For 12-inch beds, for example, or 12-inch and under, I wouldn't add any filler dirt or anything underneath. I would do compost and peat moss. And the reason for that is because here in the South, things dry fast. So if you don't have a ton of soil, you will be watering a lot. And the more you water, the more the nutrients leach out of the soil. So the more you have to feed your soil. So if you're able to have more soil, the plants have more access to the nutrients, you will have better success. Now, if your beds, like the tall ones that we have, I don't know if you can see the outer skirts of ours, they're 24 inches deep. So half of those beds, we actually filled in with a technique called ugel culture, where you take logs, you take branches. So we have a whole bunch of woods around us. We took old logs, branches, we just cut them up, and anything that will decompose and become organic matter. You can even do wood chips. Sometimes I feel like things can add too much drainage. So the more soil you can afford, the better. But I did logs. The thicker, the better, because they'll hold moisture and then they will wick moisture away in the summertime, which is excellent because we need that here in the South. So essentially, take bigger logs. I would say like this round, maybe this round would be the biggest I would go. Fill up about half the raised bed if you're doing 24-inch beds like we did. If you're doing shallower beds, like let's say 18 inches, just do thinner branches, things that'll break down faster. And then fill it up with thinner branches, then add your soil mixture, then add your fertilizer and plant. And before you know it, your soil level will decrease because the soil will compact, and then the bottom part of the bed is decomposing. So you will need to add more soil later on in the years. So I hope that helps answer all your questions. I know that was a lot. This is a longer video. This is a longer video than we normally do, but we hope that's helpful for you guys. Feel free to post questions in the comments. Our goal really is to help you guys be successful this year in your garden. Those of you that have pre-ordered plants from us, we want to make sure that you have everything in place, your gardens, your beds, your fertilizers, so that when you get your plants, you're ready to go. You got the knowledge that you need, you're excited, and you can have success. We've helped a ton of people in that Facebook group grow successful gardens, and it's so fun to see people's harvests and so fun to see you guys be successful in what you're doing. We hope that's helpful, and we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.